They spoke to him like he was something they needed to hide, as if an old man had no right to stand near his own daughter on the most important day of her life. And the cruel words came sharp, without hesitation, right there in the narrow hallway behind the wedding chapel. "Don't start anything today. Just stay quiet and don't embarrass her. You've done enough." Can you imagine hearing something like that at 78 years old? Can you imagine an elderly father holding the wedding program with shaking hands, trying to understand why the people around him treated him like a burden? Because that is exactly what happened to Henry Callahan, a quiet man from western Pennsylvania who spent decades waking before sunrise, fixing old trucks, clearing snow from neighbors' driveways, and saving every dollar he could to give his daughter Laura a better life. He stood there in his old gray suit, the one his late wife Diane always said made him look like the kind of man anyone could trust, while members of the groom's family walked past him with stiff smiles and cold, irritated eyes. They whispered as if he couldn't hear. They looked him up and down like he didn't belong in the wedding pictures, in the ceremony, or even in Laura's story anymore. And Laura, his only child, didn't defend him. She kept walking beside them, pretending not to notice anything. But what none of them knew, not the groom, not his parents, not the bridesmaids waiting near the doors, was that Henry had discovered something just minutes earlier, something that shattered him, something that would change every heartbeat of this wedding day. And before the ceremony reached the vows, the truth inside him would rise to the surface and turn the entire celebration into a moment that no one there would ever forget. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what you're about to hear will cut deep. Before all of this, Henry lived a quiet life on the outskirts of Erie, Pennsylvania. He woke up every morning at 6:20 a.m., even after retirement, because routine is something the body remembers. He brewed coffee in the old drip machine he bought at Walmart in 2003. The one with a crack on the left side that still worked just fine. He drank it by the kitchen window while looking out at the backyard he kept tidy for decades. A porch he built himself, a pair of rocking chairs he repaired over and over, and the maple trees that changed color every fall. Inside, above the fireplace, were the framed photographs that held his entire heart. Diane laughing while holding a pie she burned. Little Laura in her softball uniform, missing her 2 front teeth, a faded birthday card that simply said, "Love you, Dad." Every Sunday morning, Henry dusted those frames, straightened them, and whispered to Diane like she was still there, "I'm doing my best." His days were simple. He drove to Kroger, bought small portions, 1 loaf of bread, 2 bananas, a pack of turkey slices. Mrs. Benton at the register always asked, "How you doing, Henry?" He always said, "Hanging in there." In the evenings, he sat on the porch at sunset, rocking gently, watching school buses pass and dogs pulling their owners down the sidewalk. It wasn't an exciting life, but it was honest, familiar, and filled with memories. Yet behind that quiet routine, Henry carried a decision he made many years ago, a sacrifice that shaped Laura's entire future, something he never explained, something he never planned to reveal. But on the morning of her wedding, moments before someone told him to stay quiet, that secret was discovered by someone who should never have found it. And from that moment on, nothing about this day would stay the same. Henry never expected anyone to open that drawer. It was the one place in the house he kept locked, the one space he never touched unless he absolutely had to. But that morning, while getting ready, he realized the small brass key was missing. At first, he blamed his own memory. Maybe he had placed it somewhere else. Maybe age was finally catching up to him. But when he walked into the bedroom and saw the drawer slightly open, his stomach tightened. Someone had been inside. Someone had found what he had hidden for more than 30 years. And he knew exactly who it was. Laura's fiancé, Brandon, had gone to the house earlier to pick up a box of decorations Laura had forgotten. Henry didn't think much of it. He trusted people too easily. He always had. But when he saw the drawer open and the envelope missing, he felt the kind of cold that goes straight through a man's bones. He didn't have to search. He didn't have to ask. He knew Brandon had taken the envelope. and he knew what was inside. Laura's birth records. The original ones. The ones that showed something Henry and Diane had agreed to hide forever. The truth about Laura's real mother. Henry sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the side of the mattress until his knuckles whitened. He hadn't looked at those documents in years. They brought too much pain. Too many memories of the years before he met Diane. Years filled with mistakes. Years filled with a woman who gave Laura life but never wanted to stay. He and Diane had raised Laura together since she was 2. They made a promise to each other that the past would never hurt her. That what mattered was the love they built, not the pain that came before. But now, that promise was gone. Henry drove to the wedding venue with that weight crushing his chest, hoping, praying, that maybe Brandon hadn't understood the papers. Maybe he wouldn't say anything. Maybe nothing would happen. But as soon as Henry stepped inside the church, he felt the shift. People looking at him strangely, whispers ending when he walked by. Even the groom's mother staring like she had just learned something she shouldn't have known. Brandon wasn't subtle. He had shown the documents. He had told his family everything, and he had twisted it in the worst way possible. They believed Henry had lied to Laura her entire life to manipulate her. They believed he had hidden her real parentage out of selfishness. They believed the story someone like Brandon would want them to believe, a story where he was the rescuer and Henry was the obstacle. Henry tried to approach Laura before the ceremony. She avoided him. She kept adjusting her veil, pretending she didn't see him walking toward her. He tried again. "Laura," he whispered, his voice thin like a thread about to snap. She kept her eyes straight ahead. Her bridesmaids circled around her like a shield. And that was when Brandon walked up behind her, leaned close to Henry, and whispered words that struck like a blade. "She knows everything now, and she's finally seeing what you really are." Henry didn't react. He couldn't. It felt like someone had reached into his chest and torn something out by hand. He had spent his entire life protecting her from that truth, and now the truth had been twisted until it destroyed the only thing he ever wanted to protect. He stepped back, trying to breathe, trying to steady himself, but nothing felt stable anymore. Nothing felt real. And then he heard it, the groom's father whispering to a relative nearby. He lied to her for years. He should be grateful we're even letting him stay today. Letting him stay. In his daughter's life. In his daughter's wedding. In the family he had spent decades building from the ashes of his past. Henry looked down at his trembling hands. The ceremony hadn't even started, and the damage was already done. But the worst moment, the real breaking point, was still minutes away, and when it came, it would tear the wedding apart. Henry tried to stay invisible as the guests began to arrive, slipping into the far corner of the lobby where no one would notice him. He held his hands together to hide the trembling, but it didn't work. His fingers moved on their own, restless, unsure, frightened. He watched people walk past him in polished shoes and expensive dresses, laughing and greeting each other like it was a perfect day. For them, it was. For him, it felt like the air itself had turned against him. He had hoped for at least a moment to speak to Laura alone, to explain, to tell her the truth gently, the same way Diane had once told him they should. But every time her eyes brushed his direction she turned away, as if looking at him made something inside her hurt. And that was the part that cut him the deepest. He wasn't angry at her. He wasn't angry at anyone, not even Brandon. He was just broken, lost, trying to stand upright in a world that suddenly didn't make sense anymore. A wedding coordinator approached him with a stiff smile. "Sir, you can sit now. Family rows are filling up." Henry nodded, whispering a soft "thank you," and moved toward the sanctuary door. When he entered, the warm lights of the small Pennsylvania chapel spread across the room, reflecting off wooden pews and white floral arrangements. He had imagined sitting near the front, maybe on the aisle, where he could watch Laura walk toward her future. But when he reached the front rows, a man from the groom's side stepped in front of him. "These seats are reserved. I'm her father," Henry answered softly. "I know. Still reserved. No apology. No hesitation. Just a cold wall." Henry didn't argue. He stepped back and made his way toward the middle of the church, choosing a seat far from the center, where he wouldn't be in anyone's way. He lowered himself slowly, the stiffness in his knees reminding him of years he spent kneeling on concrete shop floors. He looked at the front of the chapel where the arch of flowers stood like a doorway to a future he once prayed for his daughter to have. He should have been proud. He should have been smiling. But instead he was swallowing a storm. The pianist began to play. People hushed. The atmosphere shifted. A bridesmaid entered. Then another. And another. Henry watched each one walk with perfect posture, perfect timing, perfect smiles. His vision blurred slightly. He blinked hard, steadying himself. When the music changed and the audience rose to their feet, Henry's heart raced. It was the moment every father dreams about, the moment he should have walked his daughter down the aisle. But he remained seated. No one asked him to rise with her. No one turned to him. And when Laura appeared at the back of the chapel, holding her bouquet with trembling fingers, Henry felt something inside him twist. She looked beautiful. He wanted to cry just seeing her. But her eyes were dull, heavy, wounded in a place she hadn't shown anyone before. She clung to Brandon's arm as they entered together, something she had never planned. She had always told Henry she wanted him to walk beside her, slow and steady, just like the day he walked her to her first softball game. But now, Brandon walked her instead, and Henry realized he was watching a memory being rewritten right in front of him. As they approached the first rows, Brandon leaned slightly toward Laura and whispered something. She nodded with a tiny, fragile motion. Henry stared, trying to read her expression, but all he saw was confusion, pain, conflict. She didn't look angry at him. She looked lost. As she passed his aisle, her eyes finally met his, for the first time that day, and that was the exact second when everything collapsed. She didn't look away this time. She didn't ignore him. Instead, her eyes filled with tears. She stopped walking for just a moment, a small trembling pause, and in that quiet, suspended second, Henry saw everything she was feeling: fear, love, betrayal, doubt, and the unbearable weight of not knowing what was true. Brandon squeezed her arm hard, trying to keep her moving. She flinched almost imperceptibly. That was when Henry knew. Laura might be hurt, but she wasn't cold. She wasn't cruel. She was trapped between two stories, one she grew up with, and one someone had forced on her. Henry stood slowly, unable to stop himself. He didn't speak. He didn't reach out. He just stood, because some instinct inside him couldn't let her walk past him while carrying that kind of pain. The entire room turned to look at him. A ripple of whispers moved through the guests. Brandon's face tightened with irritation. "Sit down," Brandon hissed quietly, his voice barely carrying past the nearest row. "Don't make a scene." Henry didn't move, not because he wanted drama, not because he wanted attention, but because he felt like if he stayed seated, something in Laura would break permanently. She looked at him for another second, her breath shaking, her eyes pleading silently for something she couldn't put into words. And that was when the groom's mother stood abruptly, pointed straight at Henry, and said loud enough for half the church to hear, "He shouldn't even be here after what he did." A gasp spread across the room. Conversations ignited instantly, and Laura's bouquet slipped in her hands. The moment everyone had hoped would be perfect was officially shattered. Henry felt every pair of eyes in the chapel land on him like a weight on his shoulders, but the only gaze he cared about was Laura's. Her bouquet shook slightly, the white petals trembling the same way her hands had when she was a little girl, trying to hide that she'd broken one of Diane's dishes. Henry's breath caught. He could see it clear as day. She wasn't angry. She was scared, conflicted, pulled apart by two worlds that suddenly didn't match. But before he could take a single step toward her, Brandon tugged her arm again, impatient and forceful, trying to get her moving toward the altar. She stumbled a bit, caught off guard, and a few whispers rose around the room. Henry's eyes narrowed with a protective instinct. He hadn't felt this strongly since the day she fell off her bike at 7 years old, and he ran barefoot across the gravel to scoop her up. But this time, she wasn't a child. And the man pulling her wasn't gravity. It was someone who wanted control, not understanding. Henry opened his mouth, not to defend himself, but simply to say her name, to steady her, to let her know he was there, but he didn't get the chance. The groom's mother, Patricia, took a step forward, her heels tapping sharply against the wooden floor. Her chin lifted with the practiced superiority of someone who believed their family story mattered more than anyone else's truth. "He shouldn't even be here after what he's done," she repeated, louder this time, making sure every person in the chapel heard. Gasps spread across the pews like a quiet explosion. Henry's heart thudded painfully. He had lived through grief, through loneliness, through the slow fading of Diane's laughter from the house, but nothing compared to the sting of that public accusation. Laura's face flushed with confusion and shame. She looked between her father and Patricia as if trying to understand a puzzle she didn't have all the pieces for. Brandon lifted his chin, pretending to stay calm, but clearly pleased that his mother had spoken up. He liked when someone else did the dirty work for him. Henry took a slow breath. He couldn't break here. If he broke, she would break. And he couldn't let that happen. "I didn't do anything to hurt her," Henry said softly, his voice steady but carrying the exhaustion of years. But Patricia wasn't interested in truth. She wanted spectacle. "You hid her real mother from her," Patricia snapped. "You lied to her for her entire life, and now she's supposed to just pretend you didn't manipulate her?" A stunned murmur echoed through the room. Laura's eyes widened, her breath catching as if she had been slapped. "Dad, is that true?" she whispered, her voice almost too soft to hear. Henry's chest tightened so suddenly he had to grip the back of a pew to stay upright. He looked at her, really looked at her. The trembling in her lips, the fear in her eyes, the desperate need to understand the man she'd trusted her whole life. "Laura," he said gently, "I never lied to hurt you. I never hid anything out of selfishness." Brandon rolled his eyes, stepping in front of her protectively as if shielding her from her own father. "Don't listen to him. He's been lying since day one. He didn't want you to know the truth because he knew it would ruin the little story he built for himself." Henry clenched his jaw, not at the insult but at how easily Brandon twisted things. Laura closed her eyes, her hand shaking as she pulled her arm away from Brandon for the first time. She wasn't pushing him away completely, but she was needing space. Space to think, to breathe. Henry felt a tiny flicker of hope, fragile but alive. The pastor, unsure whether to intervene, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps we should—" "No!" Patricia snapped. "This should have been said years ago. She deserves to know who her real mother is." Henry swallowed. He had imagined telling Laura the truth 100 times, but always with Diane beside him, holding his hand, steadying him. They had promised to tell her when she turned 18, but then Diane got sick, and the world shifted. Grief came, then responsibility, then the fear of causing Laura more pain than she could carry. He had never meant for the truth to become a weapon. "Her real mother left," Henry said finally, his voice low, raw. "She didn't want to stay. She didn't want a child. She didn't want a family." The room fell silent. Even Patricia faltered for a moment. Laura's lips parted slightly as if she'd stopped breathing. Henry went on, his voice trembling with the weight of years. "I found you in a tiny apartment with nothing but a crib and a note saying she couldn't do it anymore. I wasn't supposed to take you. I wasn't even related to you. But I couldn't leave you there. I called Diane. She came immediately. She held you in her arms and said, 'She's ours now.'" A soft, stunned exhale escaped someone in the crowd. Henry blinked back tears. "Your mother raised you with more love than I ever thought possible. She never wanted you to feel abandoned. Neither of us did." Laura's eyes filled instantly, tears sliding down her cheeks. But before Henry could reach toward her, Patricia stepped forward again, seizing the moment. "Convenient story," she said sharply. "And where are the documents proving any of that?" "Oh, right. Brandon found them. And they show you took her without any legal process." Gasps erupted again. Brandon stepped closer to Laura, placing a protective hand on her back. "You were basically stolen," he whispered loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Henry felt sick. The room tilted slightly. "That's not true," he said quickly. "Diane filed for custody." "But you never finished the process," Patricia interrupted. "You kept her without legal adoption. That's kidnapping, Henry." "Stop," Laura cried, her voice cracking. The whole chapel froze. "Stop saying that." She turned to her father, tears streaming. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me?" Henry's voice broke for the first time. "Because I didn't want you to ever feel like you weren't wanted. You were loved every single day of your life. You were never a mistake. You were a blessing." Laura pressed a hand to her mouth. Brandon stepped closer again. "You see? He built your life on a lie." Something in Laura's expression shifted. Not anger, not clarity, but a deep, aching pain. She was unraveling, and Henry felt it like it was happening to his own body. Before anyone could speak again, a sudden noise echoed through the chapel, the sound of the sanctuary doors slamming shut. Everyone turned. A woman stood there, breathing hard, her coat still wet from the light Pennsylvania rain outside. And Henry's face went white, because he knew her. He had prayed never to see her again. Laura's biological mother had arrived. Everyone in the chapel turned toward the woman at the doors as if a cold draft had swept through the room. She stood there catching her breath, chest rising and falling, raindrops still clinging to her hair and coat. For a second, no one spoke. No one even moved. Henry's hand slipped from the back of the pew as if his strength had been knocked out of him. He knew that profile, that tilt of the chin, that guarded way of holding herself, as if she never expected to be welcome anywhere. It had been more than 3 decades, but some faces carve themselves into your memory, like names into wet cement. "Mara," he whispered, barely able to say her name. Laura heard it. Her head turned sharply, eyes widening, as she glanced from her father to the stranger at the door. "You know her?" she asked, her voice shaking. Henry swallowed hard. "Yes," he answered. "I do." Patricia seized the moment like a shark that smelled blood in the water. "That," she announced, pointing dramatically toward the doors, "is your real mother." The word real hung in the air like a slap. Laura's grip on the bouquet loosened. A few petals fell silently onto the aisle runner. The woman at the doors, Mara, flinched at Patricia's tone. She looked older than Henry remembered, with deeper lines around her mouth and eyes that seemed permanently tired. But there was something else in them now, something he had never seen before. Shame. "Laura," Mara said softly, taking a hesitant step forward. "I'm sorry I'm late. Her voice caught as she looked around the chapel, taking in the stunned faces, the tense posture of the groom's family. Henry, standing rigid in the middle of it all. "I wasn't sure I should even come." Brandon spoke before Laura could. "You did the right thing," he said, latching onto Mara's presence as if it proved his point. "She deserves to know the truth before she signs her life away under a lie." Henry felt something inside him snap. "You don't get to decide what the truth is," he said, his voice low but steady. He turned his eyes to Mara, and for a moment the room seemed to melt away. He saw a dim apartment, a crying baby, a woman packing a small bag with shaking hands. He heard the echo of her words from long ago. "I can't do this. I never wanted this." "You shouldn't be here," he added, not cruelly, but with all the hurt of a man who had spent 30 years piecing together the damage someone else left behind. Mara lowered her gaze. "You're probably right," she said softly, "but it's my fault she's hurting right now. So I'm going to stand here and take whatever comes." Those words shifted something in the room. They didn't sound like the words of a woman hungry for drama or attention. They sounded like the words of someone who had been carrying a heavy stone for far too long and had finally decided to put it down. Laura's eyes were full of tears as she looked at her. "Are you really my birth mother?" she asked. Mara nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered, "I am. But Henry is the one who raised you. He's the one who showed up. He's the one who loved you when I didn't know how." Patricia scoffed loudly. "Oh, please. Now we're going to pretend this wasn't all one big lie? You abandoned her and he stole her, and we're supposed to clap for you both?" Mara turned her gaze to Patricia with a tired patience. "You must be the groom's mother," she said. You talk like someone who read half a page and decided you understood the whole book. A few people in the pews tried to hide small, nervous smiles. Brandon bristled. We saw the documents, he insisted. We know he kept her without proper adoption papers. We know he hid you from her. Mara shook her head. No, she replied calmly. That's not what happened. And if you actually read the second page of those documents, you'd know that. The entire church seemed to lean in slightly, drawn to her voice. Even Henry, whose chest felt tight and raw, found himself hanging on every word. Tell her, he said quietly. Don't protect me. Don't protect yourself. Just tell her the truth. Mara looked at him with a flicker of surprise. The last time she had seen Henry, he had been furious. Rightly so. Now all she saw was a man holding himself together for the sake of a woman standing in the middle of the aisle, clutching a bouquet like a lifeline. Mara turned fully toward Laura. When you were born, she began, I was 21. I was selfish. I was scared. I thought I wanted freedom more than anything else. Your father, your biological father, left before you took your first breath. I had no job, no support, and no idea how to take care of a baby. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. I tried for a few months. I really did. But every time you cried, I felt like I was drowning. Every time I looked at you, I saw everything I wasn't. And then one day I started packing a bag. I was going to leave you alone in that apartment and not look back. A horrified silence swept the chapel. Mara's eyes glistened with tears. Henry was the building's maintenance guy, she said. He came to fix a leak in the kitchen. He found me sitting on the floor, you crying in a crib, and a bus ticket on the counter. He didn't yell. He didn't judge me. He just picked you up, rocked you until you calmed down, and then he looked at me and said, she deserves better than this. She took a shuddering breath. I told him I was leaving. I told him I couldn't do it. He offered to call social services. I told him they'd split us apart and you'd get lost in the system. So I asked him to take you instead, to give you the kind of life I never could. She looked straight at Laura, her voice cracking. He didn't steal you, Laura. I begged him to take you. I signed every paper I could. And when Diane came into the picture, she fought to make everything legal. I ran away before the process was finished. That's why your records are messy. Not because he kidnapped you, because I ran. Henry closed his eyes, a single tear escaping despite his efforts to hold it back. For 30 years he had lived with the fear that someone would twist the story into something ugly. And in just a few sentences, Mara was finally straightening it. Brandon shook his head, clinging to his version. You could be lying, he snapped. You show up on her wedding day, and we're supposed to believe this sob story? Mara looked at him with something between pity and exhaustion. I didn't come here for you, she said. I came here for her, and for him. She glanced toward Henry. He may have kept the details from her, but he never once kept love from her. He gave her every good thing she knows. Laura's shoulders started to shake. Tears streamed unchecked down her face now. She looked at Henry as if seeing him for the first time, not as the man accused in whispers, but as the person who had stayed when everyone else left. Dad, she breathed, the words small and full of ache. Why didn't you just tell me? Henry's voice was almost too broken to use. Because I didn't want you to carry their choices, he said. I wanted you to grow up knowing you were wanted, not abandoned. I thought if I loved you hard enough, maybe the details wouldn't matter as much. Patricia threw up her hands. So, we're just going to forget the fact that he hid this for years? We're just going to pretend this isn't deceit? A different voice spoke up this time. An older neighbor of Henry's, who had quietly taken a seat near the back. You ever raise a kid alone? He asked Patricia. You ever try to make every terrible thing in their life feel just a little less heavy? She glared at him but didn't answer. The pastor cleared his throat again, unsure whether to step back into his role or remain a witness like everyone else. Maybe we should pause the ceremony, he suggested gently. Give the family time to... No, Laura said suddenly, her voice steady in a way it hadn't been since the morning began. Everyone turned back to her. She wiped her cheeks roughly with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup, but not caring. We're not going to pretend this didn't happen, she continued. We're not going to just skip to vows like none of this matters, because it does." She turned toward Henry again. "I'm angry," she admitted. "I'm hurt you didn't trust me with the truth, but I'm not confused about one thing." She took a deep breath. "You are my father." The words hit Henry like a warm wave and a punch to the chest at the same time. His knees weakened. He reached for the pew again to steady himself. Brandon stiffened. "Laura?" She lifted a hand to silence him, not cruelly but firmly. "I need time to process all of this," she said. "But I'm not going to stand here and let people talk about the man who raised me like he's a criminal when the person who actually abandoned me is standing here admitting that she did it." Mara flinched but nodded slowly, accepting the blow as something she had earned. "You can hate me," she whispered. "You have every right." "I don't hate you," Laura said quietly. "I don't know you." She turned back to Henry, pain and love warring in her expression. "But I know him. Every softball game, every scraped knee, every science fair, every time Mom was too tired from chemo to get out of bed, he was there." Her voice broke, but she kept going. "He may have kept the ugliest part of the story from me, but he never kept his love from me. And I'm not going to throw him away because of something he did trying to protect me." For a long moment, no one spoke. The pianist's hands rested frozen above the keys. The guests sat caught between ceremony and truth, between celebration and something much deeper. And then, slowly, something in the room began to shift. The story was no longer about a lie exposed. It was about a man who had stayed. And that truth was starting to surface, whether the groom's family liked it or not. The entire chapel felt suspended, as if everyone inside had stopped breathing at the same time. Laura stood in the center of the aisle, her dress trembling slightly with each uneven breath. Her bouquet wilted from the pressure of her fingers. Henry watched her with the quiet desperation of a man who had spent his whole life walking carefully around the edges of his own mistakes, praying they would never land on her shoulders. He felt stripped bare, exposed in a way no man wants to be, especially not in front of the one person whose opinion has always mattered more than his own. But Laura's words still echoed in his mind. "You are my father." That alone kept him upright. Brandon, however, wasn't done fighting. He stepped closer to Laura, lowering his voice, but not enough to keep nearby guests from hearing. "You're letting your emotions cloud you," he said. "This is exactly why he kept things from you. Because he knew you'd get manipulated by a sad story." Henry tensed. He wanted to defend her, but he stopped himself. This wasn't a moment he could rescue her from. She had to see things clearly on her own. Laura turned slowly toward Brandon, her face wet but steady. "A sad story?" she repeated, her voice thin with disbelief. "You think my father held this secret because he wanted to manipulate me?" Brandon raised his hand slightly as if trying to calm her. "I'm only saying that if he truly had nothing to hide, he would have told you a long time ago. Isn't it convenient that the version we're hearing now makes him look like the hero?" A few people murmured in discomfort. Henry's heart sank. Brandon wasn't just stubborn, he was confident. Too confident. Confident like someone who expected to win the argument because he always had. Laura blinked slowly, processing the insult wrapped inside his tone. Before she could respond, Mara stepped closer, still near the doors, but with her voice soft and clear. "He is the hero," she said. "Not because he rescued you from me, but because he stayed. Because he raised you without expecting gratitude or recognition or anything at all in return. I left. He stayed. That's the whole truth." Brandon scoffed. "You're defending him? What kind of mother walks out for 30 years and then suddenly grows a conscience on her daughter's wedding day?" Mara took the hit without flinching. The kind who finally realized her cowardice hurt more people than she ever understood. Brandon shook his head as if frustrated that she wasn't playing the role he needed for his narrative. "This is becoming a circus," he muttered. "This is supposed to be our wedding day, Laura, not his redemption story." Henry felt the words like a twist of the knife. Our wedding day, as if the day belonged exclusively to Brandon and Laura, was simply an accessory meant to fit into his plan. Laura breathed out slowly, as though pushing down a rising wave of panic. "Brandon," she said carefully, "I need you to stop talking for a minute. I need to think." But Brandon didn't stop. He stepped closer, lowering his voice even more, gripping her arm lightly but firmly. "You're overwhelmed," he said. "Anyone would be. Let's just get through the ceremony and deal with this later." Something in the way he held her arm, too tight, too guiding, caught Henry's eye. It wasn't protective, it was controlling. Laura pulled her arm away, subtle at first, then fully. "No," she said. "Not later, not pretending nothing happened." Brandon's jaw clenched. "Laura, we have 100 guests waiting. The venue is booked. The food is ready. We can't just—" "I didn't choose this chaos," she interrupted, her voice sharpening. "But I'm not walking into a marriage while ignoring the truth about the man who raised me." Brandon laughed under his breath, exasperated. "You're being dramatic." Henry's chest tightened. Diane used to say that same word about herself when she felt dismissed. Dramatic. Laura lifted her chin. "All right," she said quietly. "Let's talk about dramatic." She turned back toward her father. "Dad, you never finished the adoption process. Why?" Henry swallowed, the question hitting him in the single place he feared most. "Because Diane got sick," he said, his voice nearly cracking. "The paperwork got stalled. Then everything in our world shifted. We were drowning in hospital visits and chemo and bills. I didn't want to drag you through court hearings during that time." He paused, looking down at his shaking hands. "By the time things calmed down again, you were already calling me Dad. I didn't want to reopen wounds. I thought, if I loved you well enough, maybe the legal thing wouldn't matter." Laura's eyes softened. "It matters," she said gently. "But not the way you think." Patricia jumped in immediately. "See, he admits it. He kept it from you. He built your whole identity on a secret. And you built your whole opinion on judgment," one of Henry's neighbors muttered, earning a few nods. Brandon stepped between Laura and Henry again, trying to regain control. "Listen to reason," he said. "Family isn't about who wipes your tears. Family is about honesty." Henry's breath stopped. Laura stared at Brandon as if he had said something foreign. "Family isn't about who wipes your tears?" she repeated. "Do you hear yourself?" Brandon opened his mouth, but she kept going. "Who stayed up with me when I had nightmares for a year after Mom died? Him." She pointed to Henry. "Who drove 4 hours to pick me up when I broke down in college and couldn't stop crying? Him." Her voice cracked. "Who worked overtime every day for years so I could go to the college you brag about me graduating from? Him." Brandon's expression froze. He wasn't used to losing ground. Patricia looked horrified. The groom's siblings shifted uncomfortably. Mara watched with tears running silently down her cheeks. Laura stepped closer to her father. "You didn't do everything right," she said softly, "but you did everything with love. And that counts more than anything." Henry had to bite the inside of his cheek to keep from breaking down. "Laura," he whispered, "I never wanted you to feel unwanted." "I know," she replied, placing her hand over her heart. "I feel it here. I always have." Brandon tried one last time. "So you're just going to forgive him?" Laura wiped her face with the back of her hand again. "Forgiveness isn't the issue. Trust is. And right now, the person I'm having trouble trusting is you." A stunned silence swept the room. Brandon blinked, stunned. "What did I do?" Laura steadied her voice. "You took documents from my father's home. You read them without asking. You shared them with your family before talking to me. And you twisted the story before you even understood it." Brandon tried to defend himself. "I was trying to protect you." "From what?" she shot back. "From the man who raised me?" Patricia stepped in quickly, desperate not to let the momentum shift. "You're emotional," she said firmly. "You're overwhelmed. You're not thinking clearly." "She's thinking more clearly than any of us," Mara said. "She's seeing the truth." Laura took a deep, shaky breath and looked at Henry again. In that moment he saw something familiar, a reflection of Diane's strength. "Dad," she said quietly, "I need to know one thing. Did you keep the truth from me because you didn't trust me with it?" Henry shook his head immediately. "No," he said. "I kept it from you because I didn't trust me. I was scared. I thought if you knew everything, you might look at me the way your mother's family did. Like I wasn't good enough. Like I didn't deserve you." Those words left him trembling. Laura's face softened into heartbreak. "Dad," she whispered. She reached out a hand. Not all the way, not fully, but enough that Henry felt the space between them finally, mercifully, beginning to close. The pastor stepped forward again, gently clearing his throat. "Maybe we should all take a moment. Weddings are emotional days, and this isn't emotional," Laura said, turning toward him. "This is life-changing." She looked at Brandon, really looked at him, and what she saw wasn't a partner. It was a man who believed control was the same thing as love. "Brandon," she said, steady and calm, "I'm not walking to that altar today." Gasps erupted. Patricia's jaw dropped. Henry felt his heart stop, then restart at a painful rhythm. "You're making a mistake," Brandon hissed. "No," she replied softly. "I'm finally stopping one." She turned back toward her father, and for the first time since the morning began, Henry didn't see fear in her eyes. He saw clarity. He saw strength. He saw his daughter, the version of her he raised, the version he always hoped she would become. And at that moment, the ground beneath Brandon's feet began to crumble. Brandon stood frozen as if Laura's words had knocked the wind out of him. The guests in the chapel shifted in their seats, glancing at one another, unsure whether they were witnessing a wedding crisis or a revelation they were supposed to applaud. No one knew which side to stand on yet, but everyone felt the shift. The groom's mother, Patricia, stepped forward as if she could physically drag the moment back into her control. "Laura," she said firmly, "you are overwhelmed. Weddings are stressful. You don't mean what you're saying." But Laura didn't even look at her. Her eyes were on Henry, soft, confused, hurting, but open. For the first time since the morning began, Henry felt seen, not judged, not dismissed, seen. Brandon finally snapped out of his shock. "You can't just call off a wedding because of a story," he said, louder now, trying to reclaim authority. "This is ridiculous. You're being emotional." The word landed like a punch. Laura straightened slowly. "I'm being emotional?" she repeated, her voice quietly dangerous. "You invaded my father's home. You went through his personal belongings. You shared something deeply personal with your family before even asking me about it. And now you want to tell me I'm being emotional?" Brandon stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I did what I had to do to protect our future." Henry's stomach twisted. He had been watching Brandon carefully, noting every subtle move, every controlling gesture. Now he could see it clear as day. Brandon hadn't expected to lose control of this narrative, and he was panicking. "Our future," Laura said softly, "is one we were supposed to build together, not one where you decide what I know or how I feel." She took a step away from him, just one step, but it echoed through the chapel like a door closing. Brandon reached out as if to grab her hand, but she pulled away before he made contact. "Do not touch me right now," she said. A low ripple of whispers spread across the room. Henry felt his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Part of him wanted to rush to her side, to shield her, to take her home and wrap her in the kind of safety Diane used to provide. But another part, deeper, wiser, knew this was her moment, her turning point, her claim over her own life. Mara, still standing near the entrance, wiped her cheeks with trembling hands. She seemed smaller than before, humbled by the weight of her past. But unlike Brandon or Patricia, she didn't try to speak again. She stayed still, letting Laura guide the room. The pastor, who had spent the entire ceremony uncertain whether he should intervene, took a tiny step toward the altar. "Perhaps we can all take a moment to breathe," he said gently. "Emotions are high, and weddings bring many things to the surface." Brandon cut him off with a frustrated wave of his hand. "No one asked for a therapy session," he snapped. Gasps followed. The pastor blinked, startled. "Son, I'm only trying to help." "You're not helping," Brandon said. "You're just dragging this out." Laura inhaled sharply. "Dragging this out?" she asked. "Brandon, I'm trying to understand my life. My entire history just changed in the last 10 minutes. "Because he hid it!" Brandon exploded, pointing at Henry. The accusation slammed through the room like lightning. Henry felt the old ache return. the ache of being judged by people who knew nothing about the years he carried. But he didn't back down. He stood straighter, even if his joints protested. "I didn't hide the truth to hurt her," Henry said. "I hid it because I wanted her to grow up with love, not the weight of someone else's choices." "Someone else's choices," Brandon repeated mockingly. "Your whole life is built on excuses." A murmur rose from the guests, many of whom knew Henry from the community. People didn't always notice him, but they respected him. He was the man who fixed his neighbors' fences without being asked. He was the man who shoveled snow for the older folks down the street. He was the man who never complained. Not once. And now, hearing Brandon speak to him like this made something in the room turn sharply against the groom. Henry didn't speak again. He didn't need to. Laura stepped between them. "You talk a lot about honesty," she said quietly. "Let's talk about it then." She reached into the bodice of her dress and pulled out something small and silver. Henry's missing key. Brandon's face went pale. "Where did you get that?" he stammered. "You dropped it," she said, her eyes cold. "On the floor of my father's bedroom. That's how I knew you went through his things before I even saw the documents." A loud whisper ran through the chapel. Brandon opened his mouth to form an excuse, but Laura held up her hand. "Don't lie," she said. "I found the drawer open. I found the documents laid out on the dresser. And then you brought me a version of the story that made my father the villain before you even knew what the papers meant." Brandon's throat bobbed as he swallowed. His confidence cracked. His practiced calm evaporated. "I thought I was protecting you," he said again, weaker than before. "No," Laura replied. "You were protecting your ego." Patricia surged forward, unable to stay quiet any longer. "How dare you accuse him of selfishness?" she said, her voice shaking not with emotion but with rage. "Everything he has done is for you. Our family welcomed you." "No," Laura whispered. "Your family tolerated me as long as I stayed quiet and uncomplicated." Now the room froze entirely. Henry's breath caught. Mara stared. Even the pastor remained silent. Laura continued, her voice breaking. "Not one person from your family asked me how I felt about anything in the last few months. It was always what you wanted, what your mother wanted, what made the Donovans look good." Patricia inhaled sharply as if she'd been slapped. "We treated you like royalty," she protested. "No," Laura said more firmly than ever. "You treated me like a project you were proud of, not like a person with her own mind." Then she turned her gaze back to Brandon. "And you treated my father like he was unwanted." Brandon's jaw tightened. "Because he lied. Because he lived," Laura countered. "And he made choices that were messy and human. But he never, ever abandoned me. He never used my vulnerabilities as weapons. He never tried to control me." Her voice shook with fresh tears. "Can you say the same?" Brandon didn't answer. He couldn't. His silence was louder than any denial. Henry felt his heart pounding painfully in his chest, watching his daughter become someone stronger than he ever dared to hope. Laura wiped her cheeks again, then took a few steps back, putting distance between herself and Brandon. "I'm not marrying you today," she said clearly. "Not like this. Not with this truth sitting between us. Not when I don't trust you." Patricia gasped as if someone had stabbed her. Brandon's face turned dark red. "You're humiliating me," he spat. That single sentence shifted everything. Henry's eyes widened. Mara stiffened. The pastor frowned deeply, and Laura's expression turned into something Henry had only seen once before, when she stood by Diane's coffin and made a silent promise to never let someone speak for her again. "This isn't about you," she said. "This was never about you. Not even now." Brandon stepped forward suddenly, grabbing her wrist, not harshly enough to hurt her, but firmly enough to assert control. Henry's heart nearly exploded from his chest. "Let her go," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Brandon hesitated only a second. 1 second too long. Laura ripped her hand free. "Don't touch me," she said. "Not when you're angry. Not ever again unless I ask you to." She backed away until she stood only a few feet from Henry. And then something happened that no one expected. She reached for her father's hand, not tentative, not scared, with conviction. Henry froze. For a heartbeat he thought he might be dreaming, but her fingers slid into his, warm, steady, familiar. And when he closed his hand around hers, it felt like something broken inside him finally slid back into place. The chapel erupted into murmurs. Patricia looked horrified. Brandon's mouth hung open. The pastor seemed at a loss for words. Finally Brandon spoke, voice cracking with disbelief. "So that's it?" he asked. "You're choosing him over me?" Laura looked at him with a calm that cut deeper than any anger could. "I'm choosing myself," she said. "And the man who taught me how to be myself." Henry swallowed hard, fighting the wave of emotion rising inside him. "Laura," he whispered. "It's okay," she said. "We'll figure everything out. But not with him." Brandon turned toward Henry, fury overtaking the last of his composure. "You ruined this," he hissed. "You ruined everything." Henry didn't flinch. "I saved her," he said quietly, "long before today." And for the first time since the ceremony began, people clapped. The applause didn't come all at once. It began with a few scattered claps in the back pews, timid and unsure, like people weren't positive whether what they were witnessing was a tragedy, a miracle, or a rescue. But then someone else joined in, and someone else. And before anyone could stop it, the chapel filled with a wave of clapping, gentle at first, then growing, rolling forward like a tide of relief that had been waiting years to rise. Henry stood frozen in the center of it all, Laura's hand still held tightly in his. His knees felt weak, his chest tight, and for a moment he thought he might collapse under the weight of it. He had never been applauded in his life, not once. He had lived quietly, worked quietly, sacrificed quietly. He had gotten by without asking for thanks, believing love didn't need recognition. But this felt like something breaking open inside him. Brandon's face drained of color as the applause grew louder. His family looked equally stunned, their perfectly curated image fracturing under the pressure of reality. Patricia shook her head in disbelief, as if the idea of people siding with Henry was so absurd that her brain couldn't process it. "Stop clapping," Brandon barked, waving his arms angrily. This isn't some dramatic movie moment. This is my wedding." The clapping didn't stop. In fact, it grew louder. Someone even said, "Good for her," and another voice added, "About time." Patricia spun toward the crowd. "You have no right to judge this family," she snapped. "We are respectable people." "Respect doesn't come from shouting," someone replied. Henry didn't speak. He didn't need to. Everything Laura had said, everything she had chosen, stood between him and the world, like a shield. Slowly the applause faded into murmurs again. Laura lowered her hand from her chest, still holding her father's. Her face was streaked with ruined makeup, but she looked more beautiful than she ever had in Henry's eyes. Strong, brave, unbroken. Brandon looked around the room in disbelief, his pride collapsing like a building with no foundation. "You're making a mistake," he told Laura again, his voice shaking now, not with anger but fear. "You're letting him manipulate you. He's lying. He has always lied." "Enough," Laura said, her voice so firm it could have cracked glass. "Just enough, Brandon." She turned to face him fully. "You keep accusing my father of manipulating me, but you're the one who's been trying to control me this entire time." He blinked rapidly. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Laura asked. "You read through my father's private things. You took documents without permission. You told your entire family a twisted version of my life before even asking me what the truth was. And now, when I'm trying to understand everything, you're telling me I'm being emotional?" Brandon opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. Not a single excuse, not a single justification. For the first time, his certainty seemed to crack wide open, revealing something scared and small underneath. Mara stepped forward, wiping her face. She had been silent through most of the confrontation, but now her voice broke through softly. "Laura," she said, "I know you don't know me, and you may never want to. I can't blame you for that. But you should know. Your father didn't keep the truth from you because he thought you couldn't handle it. He kept it because he wanted to protect your heart. I know I don't deserve to say anything to you, but he does." Patricia scoffed loudly. "Oh, wonderful. The runaway mother decides she's the moral compass now." Mara didn't react. She had heard worse in her life. Instead, she looked at Henry. "You loved her more than I ever could have," she said simply. Brandon stepped toward Mara with anger rising in his chest. "Why are you defending him? You're the one who left in the first place." Mara nodded slowly. "Yes, and that's why I'm here, because I know the difference between someone who runs away and someone who stays." She looked at Henry again. "You stayed." Those two words seemed to echo through the room. Stayed. Henry felt the truth of it land deeply inside him. He had stayed through poverty, through illness, through heartbreak, through loneliness. He had stayed when it would have been easier to run. But he wasn't the kind of man who ran. Brandon, however, wasn't ready to surrender. "So now I'm the villain?" Brandon asked, his voice trembling with humiliation. "Your father steals you away, hides your real family from you, and suddenly I'm the bad guy because I tried to tell you the truth?" Laura shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "You're the villain because you didn't care about how the truth would affect me. You cared about how it would make you look. You cared about control." Brandon flinched, as if struck. Henry looked at Laura with awe. She wasn't breaking. She was rising. But the room wasn't done shifting yet. From the back pew an older man stood up. A man with a cane and a face Henry recognized immediately. Mr. Thompson, his former neighbor from down the road. "I've known Henry for 30 years, the man said loudly, his voice carrying across the chapel. "He's helped this town more times than I can count. Fixed fences in the middle of snowstorms. Ran groceries to people who couldn't get out in winter. He never asked for payment. Never asked for recognition. You," he said, pointing something like a shaky finger at Brandon, "don't know the first thing about who he is." Brandon stared, stunned. "Mr. Thompson continued, "He raised that girl with everything he had, and anyone in this town who's ever met him knows that." Another neighbor stood up. "He used to help me with my son's car when we didn't have money. Didn't even charge us for the parts." Someone else chimed in. "He mowed my lawn every summer when my husband was deployed." Another voice. "He taught my boy how to change a tire." Another. "He helped rebuild the church ramp." Another. "He brought my wife soup when she had chemo." Voices rose one by one until the air was thick with testimonies of Henry's kindness. Henry blinked rapidly, trying not to cry. He had never seen himself the way they did. He had always believed he was simply doing what needed to be done. But these people saw him. They remembered. Patricia covered her mouth with her hand as if the weight of public opinion was suffocating her. Brandon's face twisted with humiliation and anger. "So this is it?" he asked bitterly. "You've all decided he's a saint now?" "No," Laura said gently. "He's human, but he's a good man, and you're not." Brandon recoiled. "I loved you," he insisted, but even he didn't seem convinced by his own words. "No," Laura replied with heartbreaking calm. "You loved the idea of me." The room fell silent again, as if waiting for someone to breathe life back into it. The pastor stepped forward, finally finding his voice. "It seems clear," he said carefully, "that this ceremony cannot continue as planned." Patricia gasped. "You can't be serious." "I am," the pastor said. "A wedding requires clarity, peace, and mutual understanding. None of those things are present here." Brandon lunged forward as if he could force the ceremony back to life by sheer will. "You can't do this. You can't just cancel a wedding." "You already did," Laura said, her voice soft but immovable. Something inside Brandon snapped. The anger he'd been holding under layers of charm and control finally erupted. "You'll regret this," he spat. "You'll regret walking away from me. You'll regret humiliating me like this." Henry stepped forward before he even realized he was moving. "Don't speak to her like that," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it held a quiet power that silenced the room. Brandon glared at him. "You think you won?" he hissed. Henry shook his head. "This isn't a competition," he said. "It's a life." Laura gently squeezed her father's hand. Brandon looked at them. At the bond he couldn't break, the love he couldn't twist, the truth he couldn't rewrite, and saw nothing but defeat, pure, undeniable defeat. Finally he turned to his family. "Let's go," he muttered. Patricia hesitated, but when she saw the look of absolute resolve on Laura's face, she knew the battle was lost. The Donovans walked out one by one. Brandon was the last to leave, pausing at the doors long enough to give Henry a look filled with bitterness. And something else. Fear. Because the story he tried to hijack had slipped out of his hands for good. The moment the doors closed behind him, the silence in the chapel softened. It no longer felt heavy. It felt cleansing. Laura turned to Henry. Her eyes were red, her makeup ruined, her body exhausted from the emotional storm. But she smiled. "Dad," she whispered. Henry's heart broke open. He opened his arms, and for the first time that day, she fell into them. The moment Laura collapsed into Henry's arms, the entire chapel seemed to exhale for the first time in what felt like hours. Henry held her tightly, his hands trembling as they rested on her back. He had dreamed of comforting her again, but never under circumstances like this. Not with her wedding dress wrinkled from stress, her makeup smudged with tears, her body trembling not from joy but from heartbreak. He closed his eyes, breathing in the faint scent of lavender that clung to her. It was the same shampoo she'd used since she was a teenager. For a brief moment, he felt every year of her childhood flash through his mind like a film reel. Her first steps, her first scraped knee, her first day of school, the nights she cried after Diane died. All the versions of her seemed to fold into this single moment where she leaned on him like she used to when life was too heavy. "I'm so sorry," she whispered against his shoulder. Henry's eyes widened at the words. "What are you sorry for?" he asked, pulling back enough to look at her face. She shook her head as tears streamed down her cheeks. "I believed them," she said, her voice breaking. "Even for a second. I believed them. I doubted you. I doubted everything you did for me, and you didn't deserve that." Henry cupped her cheeks gently, wiping the tears with his thumbs. "Sweetheart," he murmured, "you didn't do anything wrong. You learned something life-changing today. Anyone would have been shaken. But I hurt you," she said, choking on the words. "I looked away from you earlier. I ignored you. I let their voices drown yours." Henry inhaled softly, pain flickering in his eyes, but love triumphing over it. "Laura, I've been your father long enough to recognize fear when I see it. You weren't pushing me away. You were trying to protect yourself from something you didn't understand yet." She pressed her forehead to his chest, seeking grounding. "I should have trusted you," she whispered. "I always trusted you." Henry stroked her hair like he used to when she was little. "You still do," he said, "or you wouldn't be standing here." They stayed like that for a few seconds, just breathing, just existing, until the pastor stepped forward cautiously. "Laura," he said gently, "is there anything you'd like us to do now? Anything you need?" She pulled back from Henry slightly, her hand still wrapped in his. She looked around the chapel, seeing dozens of people staring at her with empathy. The atmosphere had completely changed. Where tension used to grip every corner of the room, there was now a strange, almost sacred quiet. "I think we need a moment," she said softly. "In the fellowship hall, maybe." The pastor nodded. "Of course. Everyone, please feel free to take a short break. We'll let the family have some privacy." But Laura shook her head. "Not family," she corrected. "Just me and my father." Mara stiffened near the doorway. Laura's eyes flicked toward her briefly. Just a flicker, but enough for both women to feel the weight of it. Laura swallowed and added softly, "And Mara can come too." Henry felt a jolt in his chest. He couldn't tell if it was fear or relief or something in between. Mara's eyes widened, startled, but she nodded and stepped forward slowly, as if terrified to break the fragile permission she'd been given. Patricia scoffed loudly, refusing to stay quiet any longer. "Oh, wonderful!" she snapped. "You're going to let the woman who abandoned you have a say, but not the family who was ready to give you a beautiful life?" Henry turned toward her, the softness in his expression hardening ever so slightly. A beautiful life, he repeated. You mean a controlled one, decorated like a display case, managed like a portfolio. Patricia gasped. She had never heard Henry speak like that. He wasn't a man who raised his voice or used harsh words, but when he defended Laura, something inside him became unshakable. You don't know me, Patricia snapped, and you don't know what we were offering. You're right, Henry said. I don't know what you were offering, but I know what I offered. A childhood filled with love, a home filled with safety, a life without conditions. The room fell silent. Patricia's face crumpled with indignation, but she had no clever comeback this time. Brandon, standing behind her, looked broken, not just angry, but fractured. His shoulders drooped, his arrogance drained away. He looked like a man who had realized too late that he had been playing a role that no longer impressed anyone. Laura turned to him one last time. I don't hate you, she said quietly, but I can't marry someone who tries to control my life before it even begins. Brandon looked at her with defeated eyes. So that's it? That's it, she replied. And I hope, someday, you understand why. Brandon didn't answer. He simply lowered his gaze, turned around, and walked out of the chapel with a heaviness that followed him like a shadow. Patricia followed, muttering under her breath, her pride collapsing with every step. As the doors shut behind them, the room seemed to exhale again, no longer suffocating, no longer trembling with conflict, just breathing. Laura squeezed Henry's hand gently, then released it. Come with me, she said. Henry nodded. Mara hesitated, glancing at Henry as if asking for permission. He didn't say yes out loud, but he didn't say no either, and that was enough. They walked toward the small fellowship hall behind the sanctuary, leaving behind the guests who whispered softly but respectfully. Once inside the quiet room, Laura sat down on one of the folding chairs, still trembling from adrenaline. Henry remained standing for a moment, unsure whether he should sit or give her space. Mara hovered near the door, hands clasped tightly in front of her. The awkwardness was thick, almost unbearable, but Laura broke it first. I don't know where to start, she said, her voice tired. It feels like my whole life turned upside down in an hour. Henry knelt in front of her, not because he had to, but because he wanted to look her in the eyes. Whatever you need to ask, he said softly. I'll answer. Laura nodded slowly, processing. Okay, she whispered. Then I guess the first thing is, why didn't you tell me earlier? Henry breathed in sharply, the question he had feared for decades. Because I didn't want the truth to feel like a wound, he said. I wanted it to feel like history, not like abandonment. But it was abandonment, she said, glancing at Mara. Mara winced, tears forming again. Yes, Mara said, it was. And I will never stop being sorry for that. Laura stared at her for a long moment. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about you, she said honestly. I don't know you. Mara nodded, accepting the pain. You don't owe me anything, she whispered. Not forgiveness, not connection, not even a conversation. I came because I couldn't let someone rewrite the truth so that he, she nodded toward Henry, became the villain. Laura's voice softened, barely noticeable. Thank you for that. Mara's knees nearly buckled. She steadied herself on a chair. You look like her, Mara said. Like who I could have been if I'd made different choices. Laura blinked, startled by the confession. Henry spoke again before emotions spiraled. Laura, he said, you don't need to choose anything today. Not forgiveness, not understanding, not a relationship. Take it one step at a time. She nodded gratefully. Then, surprising both Henry and Mara, she reached for Henry's hand again. Dad, she said, her voice warm and fragile, I want to go home with you. Henry nearly stopped breathing. Home? He repeated. Yes, she whispered. I need quiet. I need space. I need you. Henry felt something inside him shatter and heal all at once. He nodded. Okay, he said, we'll go. Laura stood slowly, then turned to Mara. I need time, she said. But thank you for telling the truth. Mara nodded quickly, tears streaming. Anything you need, she whispered. Anything, even if it's silence. Laura gave a faint, hesitant nod and walked toward the door with Henry. Mara stayed behind, braking quietly, but hopeful for the first time in years. And as Henry and Laura stepped outside into the cool Pennsylvania afternoon, Henry felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A second chance. Not just for Laura, for himself. Henry opened the passenger door of his old pickup truck for Laura, the hinges squeaking the way they had for years. She gathered the layers of her wedding dress awkwardly, trying not to trip as she climbed inside. He helped guide the fabric so it wouldn't tear. The small, ordinary gesture, one he had done countless times when she was younger, helping her into the truck after softball practices, felt heavier now, edged with emotion neither of them had words for. When he closed the door, she let out a long breath, fogging the window for a brief moment. Henry walked around to the driver's side, his steps slower than usual. His joints hurt more today, but he didn't complain. He never complained. Not even when Diane was sick, not even when money was tight, not even when loneliness settled into the corners of the house after she died. He climbed into the truck and started the engine, the sound filling the quiet space between them. "Is it okay if we go the long way home?" Laura asked, her voice small. Henry nodded immediately. "Of course," he said. She turned her head toward the window, watching the chapel fade into the distance. The parking lot, once filled with celebration, now held nothing but abandoned expectations. Henry drove slowly, hands steady on the wheel despite the heavy emotional weight pressing against his chest. The Pennsylvania countryside stretched out before them. Rolling fields, barns with peeling paint, patches of forest still holding on to the last hints of autumn. The sky was gray but not stormy, just quiet. A quiet that matched the two people inside the truck. After several minutes, Laura finally spoke. "I didn't realize how much I depended on your voice," she said softly. Henry glanced at her. "My voice?" "Yeah," she whispered. "When everything was happening in the chapel, people were arguing, and Brandon kept twisting everything. I kept hearing my heartbeat in my ears. But when you finally spoke, everything slowed down. It felt like the only steady thing in the room." Henry's throat tightened. "I wasn't sure I should talk at all," he said. "I didn't want to make it harder for you." She shook her head. "No, you made it clearer." They fell into silence again, but this time it was gentler, more familiar. The same quiet that had filled the truck during long drives when she was a teenager, the radio playing softly as they went to school, or to the store, or to visit Diane in the hospital. After 10 more minutes, Henry pulled onto a gravel road that led to their small farmhouse. The porch light was off, the house waiting, unchanged, untouched. A safe place. When he parked, he turned off the engine but didn't move. Neither did Laura. They sat there together, breathing the same slow rhythm. Finally she spoke. "Can we go inside?" "Of course," he said quietly. She gathered her dress again, stepping carefully out of the truck. Henry offered his hand, and she took it without hesitation. The porch creaked under their feet as they walked to the door. Henry unlocked it, pushed it open, and stepped aside so she could enter first. The house smelled like coffee, old wood, and the faint lavender candle he kept on the mantel because Diane loved it. Laura inhaled deeply, nostalgia and comfort mixing until her shoulders slumped in relief. "It feels smaller than I remember," she said, stepping into the living room. "Everything feels smaller as we get older," Henry replied, "except the memories. Those keep growing." She gave him a soft smile that nearly undid him. The framed photos on the mantel seemed to watch them. Diane laughing, Laura with missing teeth, Henry at the county fair holding a giant stuffed bear he'd won for her. Laura walked toward them slowly, her dress whispering against the floor. She touched the edge of one of the frames. "Mom would have known what to say today," she said. Henry's breath caught. "Your mother," he whispered, swallowing hard. "Your mother would be proud of you. So proud." Laura looked down. "I don't feel very proud of myself right now." Henry shook his head. "You stood up for yourself. That takes strength. And you stood up for me. That takes heart." She wiped her eyes again. "I don't want to cry anymore." Henry smiled faintly. "Crying's allowed here." She took off her shoes, setting them beside the rocking chair. Can I sit for a bit? Sit anywhere you'd like, Henry said. She lowered herself into Diane's old armchair, the fabric worn but clean. Henry watched her settle into it, watched her body soften into the shape of someone who had carried too much in a single day. He pulled a blanket from the back of the couch, a soft blue one Diane had crocheted years before, and draped it gently over Laura's lap. She looked up at him, her eyes glassy. "Thank you," she whispered. "Always," he replied. He turned to walk toward the kitchen. "I'll make some coffee." "Wait," she said softly. He stopped. "Can you sit with me first?" That single sentence nearly broke him. "Of course," he said, his voice barely steady. He sat on the couch beside the armchair, close enough for her to feel his presence, but not so close that he crowded her. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "I keep thinking about the things Brandon said," she murmured. Henry said nothing. He knew she needed space to unravel her thoughts. "He made it sound like you kept the truth from me because you were ashamed of who I was." Henry's heart ached. "No," he said immediately. "Never." She nodded. "I know that now. I think I even knew it then. But hearing someone twist your story like that, it made me feel like I didn't know myself anymore." Henry leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Laura," he said gently, "I never hid the truth because of shame. I hid it because I was afraid of losing you. I was afraid you would see me differently, not because of what happened, but because of how the world might judge it." "Judge you?" she asked. Henry nodded. "Your mother, your birth mother, she was struggling. I didn't want you to grow up feeling like you came from pain or from someone who didn't want you. I wanted you to grow up feeling chosen." Tears streamed down Laura's cheeks again. "I did," she whispered. "I always felt chosen." The weight of her words hit Henry so hard he had to blink several times to steady himself. She shifted in the chair, adjusting the blanket. "Dad? Yeah? Do you regret it?" He stared at her, confused. "Regret what?" "Taking me," she said softly. "Raising me. Keeping the secret. All of it." Henry felt every breath he'd ever taken squeeze into his chest at once. "Laura," he said, his voice breaking, "if I hadn't taken you, I would have spent my whole life wondering if you were safe, if you were loved, if you were alive. I don't regret a single second, not one." She sobbed quietly, covering her face with her hands. Henry reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't, so he rested his hand gently on her forearm. "You're the best thing I ever did," he whispered. Laura lowered her hands, eyes swollen. "I didn't know how much I needed to hear that." Henry swallowed. "I didn't know how much I needed to say it." They stayed like that until her breathing steadied. After a long silence, she said, "Dad, can I stay here tonight?" "You can stay here as long as you want," he said. "This is your home." She nodded. "I don't want to be alone." Henry exhaled slowly. "You're not." She looked at him again. "And you?" "Me? Are you okay being alone tonight, after everything?" Henry smiled faintly. "I've been alone before, but I won't leave you alone. Not tonight." She reached for his hand, squeezing it softly. "Thank you." He stood, finally heading to the kitchen. "Let me make that coffee now." She smiled weakly. "Make it the way you always do." "Drip coffee maker?" he asked with a grin. "Is there any other kind?" She joked softly. It was the first joke she'd made all day. Henry felt warmth spread through his chest. In the kitchen, he scooped the grounds, poured the water, and let the familiar rumble of the machine fill the house. It was a small sound, but comforting, a sound that had filled this home for decades. When he returned with 2 mugs, Laura was curled under the blanket, eyes closed, but not asleep. He handed her a mug. She took it gratefully. "Dad?" she said after a sip. "Yes? When I'm ready, will you tell me everything? All of it? Without leaving anything out?" Henry nodded. "I promise." She rested her head back on the chair, holding the warm mug close. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm terrified of what comes next." Henry sat beside her, his voice gentle and steady. "We'll walk through it together." "Together?" she repeated softly. "Always," he said. And for the first time since the morning began, she believed him. Outside, the gray sky lingered. Inside, the house felt warmer than it had in years, the kind of warmth that grows when truth finally stops hiding, when wounds become words, when home becomes refuge, and when a father and daughter sit side by side, not perfect, not healed, but finally facing the same direction. The next morning, Henry woke before the sun, the way he always did. Habit was the one thing the years had never managed to steal from him. For a moment, lying in bed, he almost forgot everything that had happened the day before. His body went through the familiar motions. Eyes open, listened to the silence of the house, reached for the clock on the nightstand. 5:52 a.m., almost his usual time. But then it all came back in a rush. The wedding, the documents, Mara, Brandon, the chapel, Laura's dress, her tears, her hand in his, the sound of the applause. His chest tightened. He let out a long breath and stared at the ceiling. The house felt different now, not because anything in it had changed. Every picture, every chair, every squeaky floorboard was right where it had always been, but because Laura was in the next room, sleeping in her old bed. She hadn't done that in years. Slowly, he sat up, his joints aching the way they always did. He slid his feet into the worn slippers beside his bed and stood, steadying himself against the nightstand for a second. Then he walked down the hallway, passing Laura's door. It was open just a crack. He paused, listening. Her breathing was soft and even. She was still asleep. The sight of that half-open door tugged at his memory. How he used to peek in when she was a little girl, making sure she was okay after a bad dream or a fever. He had always watched over her quietly from a distance, never wanting to smother her, but never able to stop caring. He moved on to the kitchen, flipping on the light. The familiarity of the room wrapped around him like an old coat. Same table, same chipped mug, same drip coffee maker. He filled the filter, poured water, and set the machine to brew. The smell of coffee began to spread, warm and grounding. As he waited, he leaned against the counter and looked out the window. The sky was still dark, just a faint hint of light on the horizon. The fields behind the house were quiet, the grass wet with morning dew. He wondered what the town was saying about yesterday. Small towns never stayed quiet for long. By now, half the people at the chapel had probably told the story from their own angle. Some would call it a disaster. Others would call it brave. Some would say Laura lost a wedding. Others would say she saved her life. But for Henry, it was simpler. He had nearly lost his daughter, and somehow he hadn't. When the coffee was ready, he poured himself a cup, then hesitated. He reached for a second mug. Laura always liked her coffee with too much sugar. He scooped in 2 spoonfuls and stirred. The sound of footsteps behind him made him turn. Laura stood in the doorway, hair messy, eyes puffy, still wearing the t-shirt and sweatpants he'd given her last night. For a second, she looked like a teenager again, the girl who used to wander into the kitchen at strange hours needing hot chocolate and a talk. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," she replied, her voice hoarse. "Did you sleep?" "Some," he said. "You?" "Not really," she admitted. "But this is better than waking up in their guest room." Henry's heart twisted. "I made coffee," he said, lifting the extra mug. "Thought you might want some." She managed a small smile. "You remembered," she whispered. "I remember everything," he replied. She walked to the table, sat down slowly, and wrapped her hands around the mug when he set it in front of her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just sat there, 2 tired souls separated by decades of unspoken truth and held together by years of quiet love. Finally, Laura broke the silence. "Do you think they're talking about us?" she asked. Henry shrugged. "Probably," he said honestly. "People talk. That's what they do." "Are you embarrassed?" she asked. He thought about it. "No," he answered. "Not this time. I've been embarrassed about a lot of things in my life. About not having enough money. About not finishing things I started. About not being able to fix everything that broke. But I'm not embarrassed about standing by you. Or about you standing by me." Her eyes filled with tears again. "I keep replaying it in my head," she said. "Brandon's face, his mother's voice, the way everyone looked at us. I feel like I ruined everything. Henry shook his head. You didn't ruin anything, he said. You stopped something that wasn't right. That takes courage. They'll never forgive me, she whispered. Maybe they won't, he said gently. But forgiveness from people who don't really know you doesn't mean much. She stared into her coffee. Do you forgive me? Henry's brow furrowed. For what? For doubting you. For letting him twist your story. For not defending you sooner. Henry reached across the table and covered her hand with his. You don't need my forgiveness, he said, but you have it anyway, and you always will. She sniffled, wiping her nose on the back of her hand. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now, she said. About my job, about my apartment, about everything. One thing at a time, he said. For today, you're here. You're safe. You're home. The rest can wait. She leaned back in the chair, exhausted. What about you? She asked. What do you do now that your daughter blew up her wedding in front of half the town? He gave a small, tired laugh. I do what I've always done, he said. I make coffee. I fix what I can. I take care of my girl. Her eyes glistened. I'm not a girl anymore. You'll always be my girl, he replied. After breakfast, toast and scrambled eggs, Laura asked if she could take a shower and borrow some clothes. Henry pulled an old box from the closet in her room, filled with sweaters and jeans she'd left behind years ago. I kept them, he said, sheepish, just in case you ever needed them again. She touched the folded fabric with shaking hands. You kept everything, she whispered. I couldn't throw them out, he admitted. Too many memories sewn into the seams. Boo. While she showered, Henry busied himself around the house, straightening things that were already straight, wiping surfaces that didn't really need it. He always cleaned when he was anxious. It gave his hands something to do while his heart tried to catch up. The doorbell rang around mid-morning. Henry froze. His instinct was to pretend he wasn't home. But Laura stepped out of the hallway wearing an old sweatshirt and jeans, hair damp, face bare. It's okay, she said. We can't hide forever. Henry nodded reluctantly and went to the door. When he opened it, Mr. Thompson stood on the porch, leaning on his cane. Beside him was Mrs. Benton from Kroger, holding a covered dish. Behind them stood Mrs. Lee from 2 houses down, clutching a paper bag. We heard you might need some company, Mr. Thompson said. And some food, Mrs. Benton added. And some fresh bread, Mrs. Lee said shyly. Henry blinked, stunned. You didn't have to do that, he said. We know, Mrs. Benton said. But we wanted to. Laura appeared at his shoulder. Hi, she said softly. They all smiled gently at her. You did the right thing yesterday, Mrs. Lee said. Took guts. Took heart, Mr. Thompson corrected. They'll tell this story for a long time in this town, but I'll make sure they tell it right. Laura's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she whispered. Can we come in? Mrs. Benton asked. Just for a few minutes? Henry nodded and stepped aside. They came in, filling the small living room with the kind of quiet support Henry had never learned to expect from anyone but Diane. They set the food down on the kitchen counter. Casserole, bread, a pie, simple things. But to Henry, it felt like they had brought the whole world to his doorstep. How you holding up, Henry? Mr. Thompson asked, easing himself into a chair. Henry thought about answering with his usual, hanging in there. Instead he said, I'm tired, but I'm grateful, Mr. Thompson nodded. Good. You should be. Mrs. Benton turned to Laura. I know it doesn't feel like it now, she said, but better to find out who someone really is before you say I do than after. Laura nodded slowly. Yeah, she said, her voice thick. I guess so. Not I guess, Mrs. Benton corrected. Definitely. They stayed for less than an hour, chatting about small things. Weather, church, the upcoming town fair. No one pushed for details. No one asked for gossip. They just were there. And sometimes that was enough. After they left, the house felt different again. Not empty this time. Supported. I didn't know people cared that much, Laura said. They do, Henry replied. You just don't always see it until something breaks. She sat down at the kitchen table again. Dad? Yeah? Do you think I should go back to my apartment? To work? To normal? He thought about it. Eventually, he said, but normal might look different now, and that's okay. She stared at the table. I feel like I don't know who I am anymore. You're the same person you were yesterday morning, he said gently. You just know more now, about where you came from, about who people really are, about how strong you are. I don't feel strong, she whispered. Strength doesn't feel like strength when you're in it, he replied. It feels like shaking hands and sleepless nights, and doing the right thing even when it hurts like hell. His language startled her a little. He almost never swore, but it also made her smile faintly. Mom would have smacked your arm for that word, she said. He chuckled. She would have smacked both of us. The mention of Diane didn't bring the same sharp pain it usually did. Instead, it felt like she was in the room with them, nodding in approval. Later that afternoon, Laura's phone buzzed on the table. She stared at it with dread. It's him, she said. Brandon. You don't have to answer, Henry said. I know, she replied, but I think I will. She took a deep breath and answered the call, putting it on speaker. Hello. Brandon's voice was strained. Laura. I'm here, she said. What do you want? I wanted to say I'm sorry, he said, for how things went, for what I said. Henry listened quietly, his face unreadable. Are you sorry, Laura asked, for what you did, or just for how it looked? There was a long pause. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said finally. But you did, she replied. You hurt me. You hurt my father. You took something fragile and made it a weapon. I was scared, he said. Scared of what it meant that your past wasn't what I thought it was. Scared of how my parents would react. Scared of what people would think. So you threw us under the bus to protect yourself, she said quietly. He didn't deny it. Maybe, he whispered. Another pause. Can we try again? Not today. Not tomorrow. But someday? Laura looked at Henry. His face was calm, not pushing her either way. She took a slow breath. I don't hate you, she said to Brandon. I don't even wish you harm, but I don't trust you, and I can't build a marriage on that. So this is really over, he said. Yes, she answered. It is. You'll regret it, he murmured. Maybe, she said gently. But if I stay with someone who doesn't respect the man who raised me, I'll regret that more. She ended the call before he could respond. The silence afterward was heavy but clean. She set the phone down. Henry watched her for a long moment. I'm proud of you, he said. For what? She asked. For choosing yourself, he replied. And for choosing the truth, she exhaled. I don't know what's next. We rarely do, he said. But tomorrow the sun will still rise. The coffee maker will still work. The porch will still creak, and I'll still be here. She smiled softly. Promise? Cross my heart, he said. And for the first time since everything fell apart, the idea of a future didn't terrify her. It just felt uncertain. And somehow, with him beside her, that was enough. The days that followed felt like stepping into a different season, even though the weather outside hadn't changed. The air still carried the crisp bite of early autumn. The fields behind Henry's house still swayed with the same patient rhythm. The porch still creaked when he walked across it, but something inside him, something that had been tight and afraid for decades, had begun to loosen. Life didn't return to normal, not immediately, but something quieter, softer, and strangely hopeful began to take its place. On the first morning after the wedding that wasn't, Henry woke to the sound of movement in the kitchen. For a moment, he thought he must be dreaming. He hadn't heard footsteps other than his own in that kitchen for years. But when he stepped into the doorway, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he found Laura standing by the stove, wearing one of Diane's old aprons. I was going to bring you coffee in bed, she said, smiling sheepishly. Henry stopped in his tracks. You don't have to do that, he said. I know, she replied, but maybe I want to. The coffee smelled slightly burnt, and the scrambled eggs were a little overcooked, but Henry swore he'd never tasted a better breakfast. They ate at the small kitchen table, sunlight drifting in through the window the way it did every morning, but the silence between them no longer felt heavy or fragile. It felt peaceful, like something finally put back where it belonged. "I've been thinking," Laura said as she pushed a piece of toast around her plate. Henry waited. She had always been careful with important words, just like Diane. "I don't want to go back to my apartment yet," she said. "Not until I feel steady again." Henry nodded. "Stay as long as you want." "I'm not running away," she added quickly. "I still have to go to work eventually. I have bills. I have a life." "I know that," Henry said with a soft smile. "I'm not trying to keep you here. I just want you to have a place to land." Her eyes softened. "You always give me that." That afternoon they worked together on small tasks around the house, fixing a loose step on the porch, cleaning the gutters, trimming the hedges. At first Laura followed Henry around only watching, uncertain whether she should help or just keep him company. But after a few minutes, she picked up a pair of gloves and joined him. They talked about nothing, the weather, the neighbors, the state fair coming next month, but beneath every small conversation was an unspoken truth. Healing didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, and sometimes in the most ordinary moments. On the third day, Mara called. Henry almost didn't answer when he saw her name on the caller ID, but something inside him said he needed to. "Hello?" he said, his voice tight. "I just wanted to check on her," Mara said. "And on you? I'm not asking for anything. I just didn't want to disappear again." Henry leaned against the counter, looking out the kitchen window. "She's okay," he said. "She's hurting, but she's okay." Mara exhaled shakily. "That's good," she whispered. There was a long pause. "I know there's no fixing the past, Henry," she said, "but I want you to know that seeing you with her, it makes it very clear I made the right choice all those years ago." Henry's throat tightened. "You didn't make the right choice," he said truthfully, "but you made the choice you made, and we made the best of it." Before hanging up, Mara said something Henry knew he would carry for the rest of his life. "You were the father she needed, and you still are." Henry didn't know if he forgave Mara entirely. Forgiveness was complicated, but hearing her say those words softened something inside him that had been rigid for far too long. By the end of the week, the whole town knew what had happened at the chapel. At Kroger, strangers approached Henry with gentle pats on the arm. "You did right by that girl," they said. "You raised a strong woman." At church the next Sunday, the pastor paused the closing prayer and said, "There are fathers who give their children the world, but there are also fathers who give their children themselves. Henry, you are one of the latter." A few people clapped. Others nodded. Henry's ears grew warm, and he bowed his head, embarrassed but grateful. Laura squeezed his hand during the service. She didn't let go the entire time. When they returned home, Henry reached into the old wooden box Diane had kept under the bed, a box filled with letters, ribbons, and small mementos from Laura's childhood. He hadn't opened it in years. Laura sat beside him on the floor as he lifted the lid. "Mom kept everything," she whispered, smiling sadly. "She always did," Henry said. They went through the items one by one. A faded drawing of their house, a plastic necklace Laura made in kindergarten, a birthday card with Diane's familiar handwriting. Halfway through the box, Laura found a photograph Henry had forgotten about. It was the two of them, Henry in his work boots, Laura sitting on his shoulders at a 4th of July fair. Diane had taken the picture. "You're smiling," Laura said softly, tracing Diane's handwriting on the back. "You didn't smile much when I was older." Henry swallowed. "Life got heavier," he admitted. "But you were always the light." Laura leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, I forgot that," she whispered. "You didn't forget," he said kindly. "You just didn't know." When autumn deepened and the air grew colder, Laura started going back to her apartment a few days a week. She didn't move out completely, not yet. It was a transition, a slow peeling away from the comfort of home so she could rediscover her life on her own terms. Henry encouraged her gently. "Grow your life," he told her, "but don't think you're leaving mine." One evening after she returned to her apartment, Henry sat alone on the porch, watching the sky bruise purple. He felt still, not happy, not sad, just still. The kind of stillness a man feels after surviving something he wasn't sure he could survive. His phone buzzed. A message from Laura. Made it home safe. I love you, Dad. 3 simple sentences. And yet they filled him more than anything else in the last decade. He typed back, I love you too, sweetheart. Always. A week later, she invited him to her apartment for dinner. He walked in expecting to see signs of Brandon, pictures, decorations, the life they had been building, but everything with his name, face, or influence was gone. Instead, she had placed a framed photo of Henry and Diane on the bookshelf, right next to her diploma. That picture belongs where I can see it every day, she said. Henry nearly cried. They ate spaghetti and garlic bread, laughing over stories from her childhood. Henry told her the story of the time he tried to cut his own hair before his high school graduation and ended up shaving the whole thing off. She told him about the time she lied to him about having a sleepover when she had actually snuck out to see a school play. They talked for 3 hours. When he left, she hugged him tightly. You're my home, she whispered. No matter where I live. Henry held her until she let go. The following Sunday, something unexpected happened. After church, the pastor approached Henry and said, Would you mind giving a short testimony at the community night next month? About love, about fatherhood, about truth. Henry shook his head immediately. I'm not a speaker, he said. I fix things. I don't talk about them. The pastor smiled. You fixed more than a broken fence or an old truck this week. You mended something much deeper. People could use that kind of story. Henry didn't commit, but he didn't say no. That night, he sat on his porch again, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. The stars were faint, hidden behind a thin veil of clouds, but the air felt clean. His phone buzzed again. Laura had sent a picture, a selfie of her holding a cup of tea in her apartment. The caption read, Today felt like a good day. Thank you for being my safe place. Henry pressed a hand to his chest. He didn't reply right away. Instead, he leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the feeling settle inside him. He had spent his whole life wondering if he had done enough, if he had loved enough, if he had protected enough. And now, in the small, quiet echo of his daughter's message, he realized something he wished Diane were here to hear. He had. A few weeks later, the community night arrived. Henry stood in front of the crowd. Neighbors, church members, kids he had taught to change tires, people he had shoveled driveways for. His hands shook. His throat tightened. But then he saw her, Laura, sitting in the front row, smiling at him with the same soft, steady love Diane once did. And he spoke, not loudly, not theatrically, just honestly. Love doesn't always look the way you expect, he said. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's the choice to stay when everything in you wants to run. He swallowed hard. I stayed, and I'd do it again, 1,000 times. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then applause began. Not scattered, not hesitant, but strong, full, true. Laura crossed the room and hugged him. You did good, she whispered. We did good, he replied. And for the first time in a long time, Henry believed it. As winter approached and the first snow dusted the fields, Henry found himself sitting on the porch again, rocking gently in his chair, a blanket on his knees. Inside the house, Laura was decorating a small Christmas tree, humming softly. She wasn't living with him full-time. She didn't need to. But she visited often, and each visit felt like another thread woven into the fabric of something new between them, something stronger, something honest. Henry looked toward the horizon, where the last light of the day shimmered weakly. His heart felt lighter than it had in years, maybe decades. Time had taken many things from him, Diane, youth, certainty, but it had given something back too. A daughter, a truth rebuilt, a peace earned. And in the quiet of that winter evening, Henry finally understood. He hadn't lost his family. He had found it again, in the most unexpected way, in the most unexpected moment, but exactly when he needed it most.